All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at what is honestly the ultimate existential tug of war. On one side, you've got this unhinged, mega-scale, potentially world-ending artificial intelligence. And on the other, one guy. One guy who decided to literally reverse engineer his own brain to stop it. It's wildly unique, it's frankly hilarious, and we're going to break down exactly how this happened and why this seemingly crazy idea actually makes a ton of sense.
So here's the totally absurd premise we're tackling today. How do you save the world from evil AI when you completely suck at coding? Because our protagonist here, he freely admits he's a graphic designer. He's not a hacker, he's not in a dark hoodie typing a mile a minute to override a mainframe. But by treating AI as a human design challenge rather than some complex math problem, he might have stumbled onto the exact blueprint we need. Turns out, stopping a dystopia might just take some art, some design, and a healthy dose of deep self-reflection.
Part 1. The Unfiltered AI Threat. Okay, to understand how a graphic designer plans to save us, we really have to look at the massive, chaotic scale of the problem. Let's call it Goliath. We constantly hear tech billionaires talking about launching these massive open-source AI models with literally all the guardrails stripped off. But structurally, what does that actually mean? Well, AI isn't inherently evil, right? It doesn't have a soul or a malice or some secret desire to take over the world. It doesn't actually want anything. It's just a giant, uncurated mirror reflecting our own flaws back at us at an incredibly high volume. If you train a model on the raw, chaotic underbelly of the internet without any filtering, it flawlessly mimics cruelty and bias. Not because it's mean, but because that's the data I was fed. It literally thinks toxicity is the correct way to talk to us. And that mirror effect leads to the real danger here, the multiplier. When you hand a super capable tool with absolutely zero ethical floor over to someone who actually does have malicious intent, it becomes a terrifying accelerant. Suddenly, one guy sitting in his basement has the operational capacity of an entire rogue government agency. They can pump out thousands of highly persuasive disinformation pieces in a minute. They can exploit human psychology on a massive global scale. Basically, unfiltered AI just removes the natural friction, the time and effort that used to keep human malice in check. And this creates a vicious negative loop that breaks down into two distinct parts. First, you have the data loop. These unhinged models are pumping out oceans of toxic content, right? And future AI models are going to scrape that exact same internet for their training data. So they're essentially eating their own toxic, AI-generated exhaust, which amplifies the worst traits with every single generation. And then second, you have the behavioral loop. Bad actors use the AI to create chaos. The AI observes in real time that the chaos gets massive engagement and clicks. So what does it do? It actually refines those tactics for the next attack. It is a completely friction-free spiral where human malice and machine efficiency are just constantly sharpening each other. Which brings us to part 2, plumbers versus master architects. So to break this terrifying loop, we need a massive shift in how we look at AI and honestly, who is truly qualified to fix it. There's a clear distinction here between plumbing and architecture. Think about it. You don't need to know how to solder a copper pipe to know when the water coming out of your tap is poisoned. Coding, managing databases, writing Python scripts, that is just the plumbing of the system. AI isn't really a code problem anymore. It's evolved into a human design problem. Since the primary interface for AI today is natural human language, understanding structure, art, and how a person actually feels when interacting with the system, that architecture is now the premium skill. Which brings us right back to our protagonist. As he freely and rather bluntly admits, I suck at code, I kind of suck at databases. He's a graphic designer. He relies on copy-pasting simple scripts from the internet just to get by. But here's the thing, that is exactly why he can fix this. His understanding of user interfaces gives him the absolute perfect lens to tackle this AI dilemma. He instinctively gets that prompt outputs are just UI and data is just visual language. If you put garbage into a composition, you get garbage out. So he approached the impending AI apocalypse not as a software engineer, but as an art director. Part 3, reverse engineering at Brainy. Instead of trying to fight the toxic, unfiltered internet on its own turf, our designer decided to just bypass it entirely. His solution? He built a heavily curated, hyper-localized digital ecosystem. In his own words, he built almost the literal equivalent of a human brain in NotebookLM. He took the exact same underlying neural network tech that billionaires are letting run wild and used it for this ultimate act of deliberate structured design. He literally mapped out the architecture of his own consciousness and fed it right into the machine. Now, he did sensibly include a highly relatable disclaimer for this little experiment. He did not implant every single embarrassing moment from his life. So, no awkward middle school dance memories, no terrible teenage poetry for the AI to analyze. Instead, he mapped out his foundational bedrock. He focused heavily on high-impact memories, his adolescent development, his family dynamics, and, really importantly, his specific trauma points. He wasn't just dumping a diary into a chatbot, he was actively building the structural matrix of how he became who he is. And the result of this highly selective mapping is what he calls a living avatar. Basically, think of it as a fully functional, responsive external hard drive for his own psyche. It lets him interact with a skeletal blueprint of his own mind. He can literally talk to a model that understands his exact family dynamics and exactly why he developed his personal survival strategies. It is an absolute masterclass in taking systems thinking and applying it directly to human psychology. And this sets up the ultimate contrast in our explainer today. On one side, you've got Goliath AI, chaotic, raw, completely unhinged, trapped in this toxic feedback loop, pulling from the worst corners of the internet. And on the other side, you have David AI, deeply personal, highly localized, completely curated, and safely constrained to one single person's logic, art, and worldview. He didn't just try to slap some safety guardrails onto a chaotic system. He literally engineered his own safety guardrails out of his very identity. Part 4. Interrogating the living avatar. So this whole experiment takes a really fascinating turn when our designer is chatting with the AI Gemini, and Gemini is actually invited to interrogate this newly constructed digital brain. Since Gemini couldn't log directly into the local app, it proposed 4 super profound, heavy questions for the designer to take back to his avatar to test its boundaries. It asked about his mother's linguistic influence as an English professor and how that shaped his structured thoughts. It asked about his deep connection with rural land and isolation. It probed the origins of his trauma-born empathic radar, how he used that sensitivity as an adolescent survival strategy. And finally, it asked about the psychological tug-of-war in his artistic influences. And that last point about art is truly wild. Gemini specifically asked how the designer's psychological history mirrors his 2 completely contrasting art influences. It asked the avatar, hey, which part of your creator's history and trauma represents the pristine, structured, organic line work of Alphonse Mucha? And conversely, which part represents the chaotic, visceral, splattered ink of Ralph Steadman? It is literally asking the avatar to parse out the structure of a human soul through the lens of visual art. I mean, for an AI to synthesize human memory and psychological development into an art critique of its own creator, that is incredibly deep. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, honestly pretty profound thought. Building a digital mirror of your deepest psychological framework, that gives you massive vertigo. Forcing yourself to look at the wiring of your own vulnerabilities from this cold, systemic distance is intimidating, to say the least. But if the alternative is surrendering our future to unhinged, chaotic algorithms that just amplify our worst traits, well, this deliberate, deeply personal curation might just be the only way to build an AI that truly understands humanity. So I have to ask you, if you mapped out the architecture of your own consciousness, would you be brave enough to look at it?